My name is Jenn MacFadyen. I am a current instructor and advisor here in the college. I work in our FNDH department, specifically with our athletic training program, as well as the sports nutrition kinesiology degrees as well. And so I see lots of familiar names. I see lots of new names. So I'm just so appreciative that you all wanted to take time out of your day. I see many of you outside, and I love that. So please be near a window or outside and getting some of that fresh air. But I just want you to all know I'm so grateful that you guys are here. So as Jess said, I am a certified athletic trainer, and for some of you that may be a familiar term for you. For some of you that may totally be a brand new term. And so for those that don't know, certified athletic trainers are credentialed licensed healthcare providers that practice in a really diverse way of settings. And so we cover physically active populations of all different levels. So not just athletes, but really anybody engaging in any type of physical activity and exercise. Our scope of practice extends to, examination, treatment, diagnosis, and rehab of all different types of injuries and illnesses and other ailments that can be very emergency type injuries or illnesses, to acute and to long lingering kind of chronic ones. The one thing that I love about being an athletic trainer is that we always keep our patient at the center of our care. And so our goal, regardless of who or where we're working, is to provide that patient-centered care to help those individuals reduce any future chances of impairment or disability, to help with any functional limitations that they're seeing, and then really any societal limitations that they're seeing as well, by being out of that activity. I've worked in a lot of different settings as a healthcare provider, from the clinic to here at K-State in the collegiate setting, and currently in the academic side of it, but still working in a high school setting, providing care for some high school athletes, just a little farther south of here down in Council Grove. So my goal for this presentation and our time together is kind of really outlined here. I really want to kind of hit on some points when it comes to kind of injury prevention and injury management, and really what goes into that very holistically. So we're going to talk about all the different components that contribute to our overall musculoskeletal health. And when I use that term musculoskeletal health, what I mean is relating to your muscles and your skeletal system. So these are going to be the things that help you move on a day-to-day basis and ultimately in physical activity. I am going to touch on some hydration components. I think that hydration plays a huge, huge part in not just our injury prevention, but our injury management and maintenance as well. We're going to talk about movement beyond just exercise. I think a lot of times we think of injury only happening when we're engaging in some type of sport or exercise, but really anytime we're moving, we're at risk for injury. So we're going to talk about what that looks like to move beyond just sport and activity. And then we're going to kind of end with some really general, I think, injury prevention strategies, and then some guidelines and tips for what you can do when you are injured. And really, that's what my prize, my little basket, if you guys saw it on the Instagram stories, is geared towards. It's filled with things that can help from injury prevention standpoint. There's a foam roller in there. There's some electrolyte packets in there. There's a ice pack, hot pack. I think I stuck some ACE wraps, some ibuprofen. So we're really trying to channel the spectrum of injury prevention and injury management there. So my question to all of you, and feel free to unmute yourself, feel free to type it in the chat. I've got the chat pulled up so I can see. I want to know from you guys, what is it that you think contributes to your overall musculoskeletal health? Anybody? Strength training, sleep, yeah, exercise, love it, love it. Working out, flexibility, being active, love it. You guys are hitting all diet, yes. You guys are hitting all of these great key points. And that's really what this next slide is we've touched on some of these. Weight-bearing exercises, routine activity, love it. You guys are all right there. And I absolutely love that you have an understanding of your musculoskeletal health. So this is just a list of things that contribute to that. There may be things on here that you knew or you even said in the chat yourself, and there might be some things on here that may be new or surprising to you. So I think from a very obvious standpoint, and what you guys gave me was, yes, diet and exercise, right? Stretching, flexibility, those sorts of things. your previous injury history. How many injuries have you had? What types of injuries have you had? That's going to play a role on that, how you're feeling currently and what, you might be feeling later. Age and lifestyle, strength imbalances, flexibility imbalances, the shoes you're wearing and the equipment you're using. Obviously, technique and form. This is why we really like to have really good technique when we're engaging in different exercises. Anxiety and stress levels, fatigue level, the weather and the temperature, and then ultimately our ability to cope when we are hurt. Our coping strategies and the mechanisms that we have in place can really have an impact on what our injury is going to look like from a really big picture view. I really want to start this by talking about how everything is connected. And what I mean by everything is connected is that everything in your body has an impact on something else in your body. We don't necessarily maybe see that. I think oftentimes we get very isolated to specific areas of where they hurt, but I really want everyone to kind of zoom out and look at our body as a very holistic picture, especially when we're thinking about, injury and injury prevention. You may have an issue that's happening down at your feet, but it's actually being felt in your back, or that's where it's having the greatest impact. So we have to think of everything in our body is connected, and that every movement we do has an impact on every area in our body. We don't want to limit this to just when we're participating in physical activity. We want to think about our movements throughout the day, our postures throughout the day, whether it's in our job, in our hobby, in our exercise, whatever it is that we're doing, because small things can build over time and really create a larger issue. And in this instance, that larger issue is going to be an injury. So the very first thing I want to talk about is the importance of hydration. Now, I'm not trying to turn this presentation into a hydration lesson, because I think everyone here probably knows the importance of water, why you should be drinking water, what it does for your body and your body functions. But where I want to take water is I want to discuss the role that it plays in preventing and managing our injuries. You're probably sitting there behind your Zoom screen thinking, Jen, this lady's crazy. I don't have any idea how water is going to play a role in that. And I realize that that may sound like a crazy idea, but your body's ability to repair itself when we are injured or we are damaged, if you want to think of it that way, is going to be rooted in hydration and in water. And so we all just want to be drinking that high quality H2O, like our friend Bobby Boucher over here. So when I talk about the importance of hydration, we often think of the need for hydrating directly associated with really strenuous exercise or activity, or specifically when we're outside in the heat. And while that is important, really this aspect of hydration needs to be taken into consideration across all types of weather conditions, across all types of settings, whether it's physically active or not. Generally, we as individuals only ever replace about half of the fluids that we're losing through our sweat. So if we're sweating from exercise, if we're sweating from work, if we're just sweating because it's hot out, we're only ever replacing about half of those fluids. And where this creates an issue is we are sending our bodies into a deficit the next day when we go into whatever tasks or activity we're doing that next day, because we haven't fully replenished everything that we've lost. And so then we get into this very vicious cycle of really being at a deficit kind of all the time. When we have individuals that are engaged in very, minimal levels of activity. And so this might even be what they're doing at their jobs, right? That's their minimal level of activity. The human body requires about 2.5 liters of water per day. So when we think about from a visual standpoint, what 2.5 liters looks like, think about that 2-liter bottle of soda at the grocery store, or what you get with your pizza when you get the pack and it comes with soda. So that and a little bit is really how much water we should be consuming when we're engaged in just minimal activity. That amount increases as our activity level increases as well. We start to see mild dehydration set in when we've hit about a 2% loss in our body weight through fluid. And really a good sign of mild dehydration is when you're thirsty. And we don't want it to be our only indicator of when we should be consuming fluids, but it is our body's way of letting us know, hey, we have not consumed enough fluids. I need you to get some water in me kind of ASAP. I have a little tip there if you guys can see that. Something that I've learned in all of my time of being an athletic trainer is when you're trying to give people kind of a visual and maybe some guidance into how much water they should be consuming. You know, if you were to take your body weight and divide that number by 2, that number that you end up is equal to the amount of ounces of water you should be consuming a day when we're engaged in those moderate levels of activity. And so there's probably a lot of you that hit that, and hats off to you. I fall short all the time. I try really, really hard, but I do end up falling short. But there's maybe some of you that are sitting there going, wow, I don't even hit like a quarter of that. And so that's a really good number to kind of aim for when we're thinking about how many ounces of water we should be consuming throughout the day. Many of you may have experienced dehydration yourself. Many of you may be around somebody who experiences dehydration. The crazy thing about dehydration is that it can be any combination and any seriousness of these symptoms. The issue with dehydration is if we continue to ignore it. That's really where we're going to be setting ourselves up for some really potential serious injuries from happening. So everything from passing out to some really bad muscle cramps to a lack of coordination, which could potentially lead to some, tripping or falling, sprains and strains, that kind of stuff. So anytime you're in a situation where you feel any of these symptoms and you're thinking, oh man, I think we're starting to get a little dehydrated, maybe you're with somebody who's getting dehydrated, always a good idea to remove yourself into a cooler environment. Maybe that's inside, maybe that's into the air conditioning, whatever that looks like, and start that rehydration process. When it comes to individuals that fall into dehydration, we want to make sure that when they're returning to activity, that they have resumed whatever their normal body weight is. Because remember, we talked mild dehydration is a 2% drop in body weight. So that body weight loss increases the more we set into dehydration. And we want to make sure that they're no longer exhibiting any of the symptoms that they had previously. So we know that water is probably the be-all, end-all mecca of hydration, and I think that that's really great. However, when we're engaging, especially in activity, there are lots of different sources that we can get those hydration sources from, and I think one of the things is sports drinks. And so what I mean by a sport drink is I mean something like a Gatorade, a Powerade, a Propel. I don't mean Red Bull, soda, those kinds of things. What's great about a sports drink is, one, it tastes better than water. 2, it's going to have the added electrolytes. Those are the things that we also lose through sweat. So the things like the sodium, the potassium. So we're going to get that replenished in addition to our fluids. We want to be careful. Sometimes things taste really good for a reason. Oftentimes it's because there's a lot of sugar, but a lot of these companies like Gatorade and Powerade and Propel make no sugar added type beverages. So we're able to still manage that and consume that without getting a ton of sugar into our bodies. The biggest thing with this is we want to make sure we're drinking our fluids at regular intervals. We never want to just chug a ton of water right before we're getting ready to go do something, because 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that fluid again. And so when it comes to really getting yourself hydrated and preparing yourself for what you're going to do, this is going to span a day. This is going to span the days leading up to that. And so this very last point is just kind of a general, if we think of 17 to 20 ounces, that's about the size of like a Dasani water bottle. That's how much we should be consuming, a couple hours before activity, taking that down to maybe just a cup right before. The reason it's a little bit smaller is we avoid a lot of that fluid just sitting in our stomach. We avoid it sloshing around so that our body can absorb it and actually use it. Watermelon is an awesome source of hydration. I mean, water's in the name. What I love about watermelon is it's a great way to get not just a yummy treat, but then also those hydration sources. So in the summer, when it's hot and you just want to eat, but you're like, oh man, solid food sounds really bad right now. Watermelon is really great for those hydration purposes. It's great to freeze, stick it in your water. It's kind of a little added trick when we think of outside of just water. Pedialyte. If you've ever had Pedialyte, you all are college kids. I can assume when you've maybe had Pedialyte, but when we think about it as a recovery beverage, it does taste incredibly salty. It's very concentrated because it's made for tiny humans. And so Pedialyte is a really great source of not just the fluid, but the electrolyte component as well. And oftentimes they come in even better flavors than Gatorade. There's like a bubblegum flavor, there's a fruit punch flavor. So Pedialyte is also another source of that hydration, especially when we think about, if we are going to be sweating a lot over a long period of time. throw a Pedialyte in your bag. It's going to make a great post-recovery kind of drink to replenish some of that. So where I wanted to switch gears to now is that movement beyond exercise. So why it's important that we're warming up for whatever activity it is we're about to do, and why it's important that we do those cool downs. So my goal, anytime somebody is doing a warm up, and this doesn't have to be just before we're going to exercise or just before we're going to run, we really want to prepare our bodies for kind of all of the activities we want to do. So my goal anytime somebody is doing a warm up is we want to keep it dynamic. And what I mean by that is we want to move our whole body. So when we talk about a dynamic warm up, it is going to be continuous movement and motion that's going to get our whole body head to toe ready for whatever activity it is that we're about to take on. Additionally, what's great about these dynamic style warm-ups is they're going to help with our coordination. They're going to help with our motor ability, our ability to move our muscles. They're going to help to stimulate our nervous system, and that's ultimately going to help with our reaction time and our focus. All of these components are great for all aspects of life, not just sport and physical activity. These are great things when you're going into work. These are great things when you're going to do something else. We want to have these really positive benefits. And I know that it sounds really silly to warm up for work, but if we can get that blood flowing, we can get that air flowing through our lungs, we can help stimulate that nervous system, we're going to have some really positive outcomes on the back end for the individuals that we're working with or we're helping. What's really great about these dynamic warm-ups is when you are engaged in some type of physical activity, and remember, physical activity is defined at all levels, right? Even if you're just going on a walk, even if you're going up and down stairs as part of your job, this does not have to be a formal exercise sport type thing. What's great about these dynamic warm-ups is they're going to help really prepare our muscles and our joints in a manner that's very specific for the movements that we're about to do. So we can really enhance this warm-up specific to what it is that our body's getting ready to do, the amount of stress our body's going to take on through movement, through resistance, through weight, whatever that looks like. So we can really tailor that to that individual and what their needs are. Generally, what's really great about a dynamic warm-up is it's going to prepare your whole body. Very rarely are we engaging in any type of physical activity and we're not using our whole body in some capacity, right? Some parts of our body may work harder or move more, but we're generally using our whole body when it comes to whatever activity it is. So this is why we want our warm-up to include kind of exercises for all those different body parts and body regions, but then we can add those really specific components in for whatever activity it is we're going to do. One example I can provide is I work in the high school setting. I work with a lot of overhead athletes, so think like your baseball players, your softball players, your throwers on the track team. It's really great when I can incorporate or help them incorporate some really specific arm and shoulder exercises into their already dynamic warm-up, because I know that their arm and shoulder is going to be doing a lot of the work when it comes to practice and when it comes to competition. We can take that same mentality to an individual that is working in a job that is primarily overhead, right? It's construction, it's landscaping, it's working on stocking shelves, right? That is a lot of overhead movement. We can tailor that and still incorporate those same overhead style exercises to help that individual with the job that they're about to do. And what's ultimately great about that is when we see it in the workplace setting, we're reducing the incidence of job place accidents or injuries, which reduces the amount of workers' comp, which reduces individuals' time away from work. It's a win-win-win kind of situation all the way around. The great thing about a warm-up is we really don't have to make it this very long, drawn out type thing. 5 to 15 minutes, a really good indication that you've done a good warm-up is you start to break out into a very light sweat. It means that we've got the blood flowing through our body enough and our body's warm enough that we're ready then to go into the activity that we're getting ready to do. These are just examples, and this is a long list, and I totally understand that. These are just some examples of some of those dynamic type exercises and the reason that I really put these ones on here is because they work you head to toe. Even though like a high knees or a butt kick, right? We're working quads and hamstrings. We're still using our arms, right? We're still increasing our breathing. We're using our shoulders. We're using our ankles. We're able to use our whole body when we're doing some of these warm-ups. You know, like I said, just a small snippet of some really good whole body type exercises. This list gets even bigger when you start to think of really body region specific. I mean, there's just so much. I could have given a whole presentation on different types of warm-up exercises, but I don't think that's what Jess was looking for. So my good little tip there is when you're doing a warm-up, the goal is for you to keep it moving and keep it fun, right? We don't want to be stagnant and stale in our movements. We don't want to just do the same thing day in and day out. So pick different exercises each day. Find a way to make it fun. Do it with a partner. My dogs love to join in anytime I'm exercising. So if you are doing exercises and want to play leap over the dog, you know, that's just an added benefit in there as well. But the goal is to mix it up, keep it fun, but keep it moving. That's the goal of these really dynamic type warm-ups. All right. Opposite of our warm-up is when we're done with our activity is we want to have what we call a cool down. Now, in my experience, when I talk about these in class, and I usually ask my students, which ones of you are very active and work out? And I'll ask them who do a warm up, and most people usually do engage in a warm up. But then when I ask how many do a cool down, all of our hands go down. And I think a big reason for that is because when we're done doing something, whether it's work, whether it's exercising, whatever it is, you're tired, right? The last thing you want to do is more movement, right? You're tired, you're hungry, you're sweaty, you have 1,000 things to do, you need to get home. So this is why this sort of cool down becomes the most overlooked aspect of any physical activity that we're doing. But it is just as important, and I'm going to go on a soapbox here and say that it actually probably is a little more important than that warm up. What we want with our cool down is we want to bring our body back down to that resting state. So if we had high stress with work, if we got our heart rate up at the rec, you know, whatever it is that we're doing, we want to bring our body back down to what is our resting state. And that can be done through a really good cool down. These cool downs don't have to be long. I think I have there 5 minutes is sufficient, but you want to give your body a chance to come back down to that resting state. Research also shows that cool downs help reduction in muscle soreness and injury the next day. So when we're thinking about, you know, maybe why is it that we're dealing with some long-term soreness after activity, maybe it's because we're not doing enough cool down to get our body back down to that resting state before we go and tackle the next components of our day. And so lots of research being done on cool downs and how they are effective in not just reducing muscle soreness, but also reducing injury the next day and the days leading into it. So definitely, if you're not doing a cool down now, maybe start to incorporate run and see how you feel going into that next day. So we've talked kind of a couple what I think are really key things when it comes to kind of that injury prevention and some of that injury management. But I do want to take it even further and talk about, you know, how to prevent some of these future cracks and snaps and pops that you may be feeling or may not be feeling yet and may feel, you know, at some point in the future. You know, I think when we engage in any level of physical activity, it dictates that we're going to get hurt at some point, right? These aren't going to necessarily be life-altering surgical type injuries, but we are going to get hurt at some point. And so we want to avoid that as best we can. But we also want to know, you know, are there things that we can do to maybe prevent serious injuries from happening? So one of my big tips is when you are going into your physical activity, you want to make sure that you are well nourished, okay? You are well hydrated, you're well rested and with minimal stress. I know a lot of people use physical activity as a stress relief, and I think that that's great. The reason that I say with minimal stress is I think a lot of times with stress comes a lot of distraction, right? You're trying to work out whatever it is that's causing you stress, and maybe you just continue thinking about it. And so we can become very distracted. And in my world, distraction leads to injury, right? We're not paying attention to what we're doing. We trip, we fall, you know, we make a mistake that we might not otherwise make if we had a little bit more focus on what we were doing. So that's really what I mean coming at that, you know, minimal stress kind of level. When I talk about this well-nourished component, you know, I want you all to think of your bodies as cars, and we are all BMWs because we are all expensive and we are all important. And we all want to make sure that what we're putting into our body is really, really high quality. This is not me saying that everyone has to go out and be kale eaters, right? I try to like kale, I just can't. But what I mean is you have to think about whatever you are putting into your body is what your body's going to rely on when it comes time to healing and repairing itself. So if we have somebody who is suffering with some injuries, or we get into this cycle of injured, not injured, and we can't really seem to get out of it, but they're also not consuming enough calories, right? They don't have enough in their body that their body can use for the energy they need to get through the day, right? To operate their normal daily body functions. And then on top of that, to heal itself. That can be very problematic. On the opposite end of that, if all we're doing is putting into our body things that have no nutritional value, right? Our body has nothing to pull from those to give back to our body when we're trying to heal and repair ourselves. So these are some things when we think about that well-nourished component, that muscle soreness, that injury prevention. Food is going to play kind of a really big role on that, not just going into whatever it is that you're doing, but then making sure we're replenishing that afterwards, making sure we're feeding our body and our muscles and our joints so that we don't feel that soreness or that pain, because our body has really great nutrients to pull from. One thing that I get a lot is I hear a lot of people want to build their strength, right? We want to make gains, #gains with a Z. I think it's really important to understand that if you are working on strength building, you also want to be incorporating that flexibility component too. We want to think of, you want to be strong through all of your movements, right? We don't want to be strong up to this arm height or up to this leg height. We want to be strong through that full range of motion. And when I think about this with individuals who are engaging in maybe everyday types of physical activity, whether it's through their job or through their hobby, we definitely want to make sure that they're not limiting themselves and having to compensate for their movement. So we want to make sure that they're just as strong overhead as they are with their arms by their side. So if we're working on that strength, we want to be strong through that whole range of motion, through that full movement, and not just at certain components. So I think it's really great when strength and flexibility can go hand in hand. Years ago, I worked at Michigan State. I did an internship. And one of the things that I loved about their strength and conditioning coach is that anytime the athletes were lifting, if they weren't actually in the squat rack lifting, they were stretching the opposite muscle group that they were strengthening. And so it had a significant impact in injury reduction, especially soreness, and a lot of that stuff that we see maybe after some heavy strength training days. So I always like when flexibility and strength can go hand in hand. Making sure, like I said, you're replenishing those fluids and those nutrients that you lost. Your body relies on what you're putting into it to give you your energy, right? When you are experiencing an injury or soreness, or we're wanting to prevent those, we want our muscles and our joints to have really good resources to pull from to keep them strong and keep them stable. And that's going to come from the food that we're putting into our body. I think it's important to continue moving throughout the day. As students, you guys probably get that, especially now that we're transitioning to a little bit more of in-person. You're getting to walk around campus a lot more, but we might see individuals out in the real world that, you know, their lifestyle or their job is rather bound to a chair or very sedentary. So encouraging that continued movement so our joints aren't getting stiff, our muscles become accustomed to that movement so that we can continue to keep that blood flowing. With blood comes really good nutrients. With that comes really good repair and healing. So really encouraging a lot of continued movement throughout the day. You know, at the end of the day, when it comes to pain, no one's going to be able to feel pain for you other than yourself. And so when something doesn't feel right, that is your indication that, hey, maybe I need to do a little bit of a follow-up. Maybe I need to look into this some more. Maybe I need to pay some attention to this pain. Because if we let pain go unnoticed, or if we let pain just kind of linger around, that pain can develop into some more serious issues. That pain can cause modifications in how you move, right? You're compensating. Now you're starting to move different. Now other things are starting to hurt. So we always want to make sure that we're listening to our body and to that pain, because that's really our body's indication of saying, hey, this doesn't feel right. We need to stop doing this, and you need to pay attention to what is going on here because this does not feel good. Okay, on the flip side, Like I said, we are bound to get injured, right? Whether it's through activity, whether it's through rolling your ankle off the sidewalk, because we've all done that. That edge of the sidewalk man comes out of nowhere. I want you all to have some very general kind of guidelines for what it is that you can do to manage injuries. Not every injury requires you to go to the hospital. Not every injury is life-altering or life-threatening. And so this is where we can really manage those things ourselves if we have the good tools and the good resources available to us. So like I said, we don't want to ignore pain. I think we often in our society get into a mindset that pain is somehow equated with weakness, or pain is somehow equated with the inability to do something. And I see that to an extent. However, pain is also our body's indication that something doesn't feel right. That's why pain exists in our body. It's to let us know, hey, I don't like that. That doesn't feel right. We need to stop doing it and do something to make this pain go away. Those of you that engage in activity, in various levels of physical activity, through continued exercise, through continued physical activity, our bodies are able to adapt to what I'm going to call different levels of pain, right? We know the pain that comes with doing a really, maybe strenuous workout, right? But we know that we're not injured, and we get through that and we move on the next day. But then we sort of know the difference between that and the, I did just roll my ankle and it's broken kind of pain. And so we can learn to condition ourselves through physical activity to kind of understand what our pain levels are and what those look like to us when it comes to feeling that pain. One of my great points of wisdom as an athletic trainer is, when in doubt, I say RICE it out. So RICE is probably a familiar acronym to some of you. It stands for rest, ice, compression, elevation. What I mean by rest is not a Netflix binge session on the couch. What I mean by rest is removal from whatever is causing your body that pain or that stress. So maybe it's a decrease in the intensity of your physical activity. Maybe it's needing to modify whatever it is that you're doing. But I don't mean rest like sleep rest. I mean, like, we need to give that body part a chance to not take on so much stress through movement and whatever's causing it pain. Ice is great, right? Bags of frozen peas are awesome. Bags of frozen vegetables, ice bags, ice packs, all those things are great. Ice is really good during those initial kind of days when we are having pain. Ice and pain are really correlated and very linked. A lot of research being done on ice. Ice doesn't have as much of a long-term effect on swelling as we used to think, right? One of the things that I remember learning going through college is, everyone just iced, right? It was swollen, we iced. Ice is really there to help with pain, okay? It numbs the pain. That's what we're there for. Really, what's going to help with anytime we have that swelling is going to be that compression. So we achieve compression through ACE wraps, through any type of compression sleeve, anything that's basically going to decrease the space that swelling can expand. That's what's really going to be our trick if we do roll our ankle. My phone never rings, and it's now ringing. What's really great about compression is that's going to be the key to what's going to help with that swelling. Is we want to compress that swelling. We don't want to let it expand into a joint or into a body part. We want to keep that swelling at bay. So that compression combined with elevation. What I mean by elevation is we are getting that body part up and above our heart rate. We're going to let gravity help control that swelling and pull that swelling back into our body rather than making it pool in whatever joint or whatever further down joint. So if we think of like a sprained ankle, we don't want that swelling to pool in our toes. We want that swelling to be pulled back up into our body. So compression and elevation are going to have a much more significant impact on swelling than ice. Ice is great for those first couple days when we're experiencing pain, but then we really want to switch to that compression and that elevation. I get a lot of people that ask me about ibuprofen and Tylenol, and I think ibuprofen and Tylenol serve a purpose if we're taking them properly and we're taking them correctly. I do not believe in really chronic long-term use of ibuprofen and Tylenol, because I think while our body lets us know when we're in pain, pain also is kind of our guiding factor to when things are getting better. Where I think ibuprofen and Tylenol serve a really great purpose is, again, those very initial stages of when we are dealing with an injury, but it's really only if they're taken properly. I hear a lot of people tell me that the only time they take ibuprofen or the only time they take Tylenol is only when they feel pain, and that's the only time, right? They don't take it a few hours later, it's just that one time, and they are kind of dealing with some long lingering types of pain. So I just really circle back to, if you're taking it properly, you're following the recommended doses. I always encourage taking things like ibuprofen and Tylenol with a meal. If you're following that, for 3 to 5 days following an injury, it's going to have a much more significant impact on that injury than if you were just taking it the one time as soon as you got injured. So really circling back to making sure that we're taking it properly. One of the things that, as an athletic trainer, that I think is really great when I'm working with individuals is to really start thinking about, what is it that maybe caused your injury, right? It's very obvious if you had a specific moment, right? You rolled your ankle, you fell down. Those sorts of things are very obvious, but sometimes injuries can come out of nowhere and you can't recall a specific moment that you hurt yourself. Rather, it's been sort of this ongoing, maybe very reoccurring overuse type thing. And so when it comes to that, we can kind of take a step back and look at, what is it that we're doing in our day-to-day life that might be causing this, right? Is it directly related to, the shoes that we're wearing? Is it directly related to our stress level? Are we going into our exercises, overstressed or over fatigued, or we're not getting enough to eat, or we're not drinking enough? So really stepping back and taking a look at your body as a whole, how it relates to that injury, because again, remember, everything's connected. So if you are wearing bad shoes, right, that don't offer any support, but you're dealing with back pain, that might be the reason that back pain is happening, especially if you can't remember like an incident where maybe you tweaked your back or you fell on it, and that's what is causing that pain. One of the things that I think is really important when I talk to my students and my athletes and my patients that I work with is, there is nothing that we can do, we as healthcare professionals, you as the injured person, that is going to speed up your healing process. There is no magic pill, there's no spell, there's no drink, there's no recipe, there's nothing that's going to make you heal faster. What we do that makes it seem like our injury might heal faster than somebody else's is, we always want to create a very conducive environment for our healing process to work at optimal maximum capacity. And there's a lot of things that go into our environment, right? Our age plays a huge role in that. Our nutrition, our lifestyle, what it is that we're doing. And so when it comes to that healing process, and if you put two people side by side with the exact same injury, they might have very different healing timelines. And a lot of that is going to be attributed to their environment and what it is that they're doing or not doing to allow for that healing process to work at its optimal capacity. Our body heals itself, which I think is really great, but it has to do what it needs to. It has to accomplish what it needs to so that you can ultimately heal yourself. So if we are returning to our activity too soon, right? We think we feel okay, and so we're going to go try it out and we're going to go right back into where we were pre-injury 100%. That's probably not going to be good on that injury, right? There's lots of different things that go into this. So ultimately, while we can't speed up the healing process, we can allow that healing process to work at its maximum capacity and maximum effort so that it can achieve what it needs to do 100% all the time, right? And the best way to do that is to create that really conducive environment. I've said it once, I'll say it again. Think about the things that you're putting into your body. I worked with collegiate athletes that especially, I worked with track and cross country runners. And so I think when it comes to activities, I think that really garnish a very specific body type, we don't ever want to practice any sort of self-starvation, calorie deficits when we're engaging in moderate levels of activity. And we definitely don't want to be achieving that through dehydration. So if we are dealing with someone, or maybe you are somebody who has just an injury that, you just can't seem to shake, take a step back and look at what you're putting in your body. Are you eating foods that are protein rich? Are you eating foods that are rich in things that are going to help replenish your body? And I get it. You all are in college. I work multiple jobs, and I totally get the get done at 8 p.m. You don't feel like cooking, going to run through the drive-thru. I get that. What I mean by this is, your more often than not choices are better than those moments when you need to make some different changes that are maybe outside of your normal routine. Because I think diet and nutrition levels play a huge role on our body healing themselves. I've seen a lot of individuals that suffer from excessive cramping. So when we think of muscle cramps, right? Maybe it's at their job and they're seeing it in their forearms or their hands. it's you all that are maybe starting to run, or maybe you're playing intramurals and you're starting to see a lot of cramping in your lower legs. We often think of cramping as maybe a lack of water. And while it's true to some extent, beyond that, it's a lack of those electrolytes and that sodium. So I've been in enough situations where I've had students, I've had athletes, I've had patients that are suffering from really long-term cramping. And rather than pumping them with fluid, what we're trying to build up is those sodium levels. So we encourage, adding a little bit of salt to your eggs in the morning, having some pretzels with your lunch. Those little bit of elevated sodium levels are ultimately going to benefit you in the long run, because while, yes, we think of salt as bad, because what does salt make us do? It makes us bloat. We retain water. When we're engaged in kind of some moderate levels of physical activity, that is actually a benefit for us. Our body's able to retain those nutrients that are in that sodium, that water that we need, that we can rely on while we're doing that physical activity, so we don't just suddenly collapse. And so this is the age-old added, like, some of you may come from the era of like pickle juice, right? Those you may, I see it a lot in football, right? The pickle juice, it's that same mentality. Those really, really salty foods can really actually be beneficial when we're engaging in moderate levels of physical activity, especially when we're going to be sweating, because we're going to be losing all of those nutrients through our sweat. So that little bit of extra sodium, even if it's just on that day, is going to have a really great benefit in the long run. There may be some of you here that run marathons. Maybe you participate in triathlons. I think those are great moments, because not only is it strenuous activity, but it's sweating over long periods of time, right? So you want to make sure that your body has those constant nutrients and that constant water to rely on to carry you through that activity. So that little bit of added sodium has proven to be really beneficial when it comes to helping with that cramping and those muscle cramps. And lastly, I think it's really important to be prepared. I, as an athletic trainer, find that I have lots of mini first aid kits in my car, in my purse, all around. So I'm never without Band-Aids, ibuprofen, Tylenol. You find me, I usually have it. But I think it's really great, especially when you're engaged in some type of activity, whether it's work, hobby, you're on some type of sports team, to have your own little injury prevention, injury management kit. And this doesn't have to really be anything fancy. We hurt ourselves, right? Band-Aids and gauze are really great to help when we have a wound. We definitely want to keep that clean. ACE wrap, right, to help with swelling, ibuprofen, Tylenol, a foam roller or something similar, right? Foam rollers are really expensive. I don't know if anybody's ever actually looked at owning one. They are expensive for what they are. PVC pipe, $2.48 at Home Depot, pre-cut, works just as well. Tennis balls, baseballs, lacrosse balls, cans of hairspray, anything that's really dense that isn't going to crush when you use that foam roller. I put bags of frozen peas. I think frozen peas make the best ice bags, because peas are really small. It's like Sonic ice, right? If I could make every ice bag out of Sonic ice, it would be great. But what's great about the small ice is it helps to really form to your body. So when you have weird spots like an ankle or a wrist or a hand where it's not nice and flat, those bags of frozen peas or corn are really, really great to have that. I think it's just great to have one or two of those if you have a freezer for those moments when you have that pain and really need to ice that area. So bags of frozen peas, I love them, instead of buying like a formal fancy ice pack. So, well, I am so appreciative of you guys being here. I hope maybe you learned something. Maybe you'll take this guidance into your everyday life. Maybe you'll take it into future work with people that you're going to work with. Maybe you'll tell your roommates, but hopefully you guys learned something.